All right, so I put a little bit more time into this torn card idea that I had, and I'll share it with you. I've made a couple of minor adjustments, but essentially what we're looking at here is the same essential performance that you saw in the video that I posted recently. You'll need for this cards and a Sharpie, as you would for any kind of torn restored card routine where the card is signed. You can use any card from the deck of cards, in that a card could be freely selected, or it could be a card in use, maybe a card that was selected already and used in an ambitious card routine that's been signed. Now, for me, I've got decks upon decks of incomplete decks of cards that I've been pulling from to practice this. So I've got kind of a large stack of them. And what I do, and what I would do if I do this more regularly, is I would probably take a duplicate from that deck to put into a deck in use, and then I would just force it, just for the sake of using, used cards. The other possibility is to just have, a deck size chunk of cards from old incomplete decks and use that just to do this kind of routine. You could do an ambitious card routine where you don't necessarily have to show that all the cards are, different and there's no duplicates or anything. Just use them just for those kinds of routines. But if you're going to use a deck for kind of a typical set of tricks, you may want to have a duplicate so that you're not ruining a bunch of decks. So I just have a spare card on top of here. Now, what do we need for the method? Well, it's pretty simple. It's a piece of apparatus we've already talked about on the channel here recently. I was thinking about these kinds of routines, and they're a lot like other routines, namely bill switches. It's really torn and restored is kind of a variation of a bill switch, in that you're switching out one thing for another. And when you're not doing that on a torn and restored, you're using something that's heavily gimmicked, something that's very gimmicked and that's been built. So you've taken some cards and you split them and you've put together a contraption that starts out kind of in an interesting form, but then once it's assembled at the very end, it can be kind of scrutinized. So you're doing one of those two things. You're either switching in something to tear up and then switching back in your original, or you are using something that's very heavily gimmicked. I didn't want to deal with anything gimmicked. I wanted to see if I could do something with just two real cards, one being a duplicate that can be switched in for the tearing. And I wanted to see if I could do it in a cleaner way than having to ditch parts and pieces. So that got me thinking about the thumb tip solution. Now, the hang-up here is that a card does not fit well into a thumb tip. Even if it's folded into quarters, it doesn't really fit. It's really rigid. A typical thumb tip size won't accept it. So then I got to thinking about making what I call a thin card, and that's where you split the thin layer off of a back and the thin layer off of a front, and then you put those together as a thin card. It's missing the cardboard in the middle, and you get kind of a really thin, flexible card. And that seemed like a good idea, except that it gets me into the realm of making gimmicks, and I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted to see if I could do it with a regular card. So I threw away that idea. However, I'll give you a little bit of a tip here. Thin cards are very good for some other things. If you do Colossal Killer, and that might be a effect that I talk about sometime. I've been thinking about doing a tutorial on recovering from mistakes, and what do you do when things go bad? What do you do when you don't have the proper outcome in a trick? What do you do if you mess up? Let's just put it that way. And Colossal Killer is a great effect that can be used just for that. You don't even have to do the trick for the trick's sake, but just when you make a mistake, a Colossal Killer, that effect can get you out of a whole lot of trouble. And if you know the effect, this will make sense to you. But you could make your effect card or cards out of thin cards, meaning that you make cards that have a thin layer against a thin layer, and it makes the card thinner, and it's just a little bit more compact to deal with. So just an idea out there. If you're familiar with that effect, that'll make a whole lot of sense to you. And that's how actually I carry Colossal Killer in my wallet, is been gimmicked that way. I made a set just that way. So I thought about that. I didn't like that idea. I wanted to use a real regular card, so this is what I came up with. Now, I did resort to this, and this is a king-size Vernet thumb tip. I've had this for years. I bought this a long time ago, and I've never had a use for it. You can see that it's quite a bit longer than a regular thumb tip. A regular thumb tip size looks like this. That's a regular Vernet. And this is the king size. It's quite a bit more. And the theory behind this is that you would put a larger silk or something bigger, or you could put fluid in this or something like that, or a couple of sugar packets. You could put a lot more into this, and it would load in a lot more. Now, the other part of this is that it's a much bigger radius. If you look at that, it's just a bigger thumb tip. So on me, it fits on over my thumb completely. Like that. I can't bend my thumb to put it on, but it fits, it fits on with a lot of room in there against the pad of my thumb. Whereas a regular thumb tip, it fits on fairly completely too. I have small hands, but I run out of space a little bit more on the classic Vernet. For normal thumb tip size, thumb tips should fit on up to the joint. And that's why I use kind of a junior-sized thumb tip usually, or a lady's thumb tip, or sometimes even a fingertip in the right size for my thumb. So sometimes I'll use a full-size Vernet thumb tip if I'm using it for bill switches, so it's got a little bit of room in there, or if I'm doing a double bill switch where I've got two bills back-to-back inside of it. But this guy is just way too big for that kind of stuff. I've never had a use for it. So I thought about, well, does it work with a card? Does it work with a playing card? And I found some very interesting things. So I'm going to share this with you, and this essentially is the method, but I'm going to show you the handling that I work through to make it work as smoothly as I can get it. There's a little bit of fidgeting going on in there, and you can see that on the video. One of you even pointed it out. But I think with some proper talking and patter and misdirection, you can really get away with a lot. So I'll show you how to handle the card, how to get it in there, and how to make this somewhat smoothly using a king size, jumbo size thumb tip. So, get on Amazon.com and buy one of these tonight for a few bucks, and you'll be able to do this torn and restored pretty cleanly using real cards, and really not a whole lot of other gimmicked innovation that you have to worry about. So the first thing is the setup. You need a spare card, and the neat thing about doing this is that if you save your card that you tear and restore, the final card, the card you start with and the card you end with, you can use that card as your next duplicate. So I'll show you what I mean by that when we get to the end of this. So setting this up, here's how I did it. I took the card, and you want to fold it like this. So you're going to fold it in half long ways, put a good crease into it, and then fold it in half again. And you want this fold to be pretty square. Just for the sake of presentation. You don't want, margins sticking out everywhere. So you want it a fairly square packet. And then what I do is I fold it the other way. Now, I don't want to break up the coating very much, so I don't fold it really hard, but you just want some clean folds in it. That will be easy to tear. Now, on that front, tearing it can be tricky if you don't do some pre-tearing. So what I did in mine, this is what I learned, was I put just a little bit of a tear in the center, about not quite 1/4 of an inch in both directions. Okay, and then this is the position you want to be in. So it's folded in half this way. You've got your tears in it, to starter tears. Fold in half this way and then fold down that way, and this is what you should be looking at. And this is going to go inside of the thumb tip. Now, you don't need to, pre-bend or anything like that. We're going to do some handling that will make this fit fairly easily inside of this. Now, one thing that got me thinking about this was a number of bill switches that use bills folded only into quarters. You can actually get dollar bills folded into quarters into thumb tips a lot more easily than you might think. Traditionally, the bill switch is done by folding into 16ths to get it in there. But if you fold it into quarters, or rather eighths, I guess is what we're talking about. If you take a dollar bill and you fold it into eighths like that, it actually will go into a slightly larger thumb tip relatively easy. Just a little bit of force and you can get it in there. So you can do bill switches folded into eighths if you have a thumb tip that's got a little bit of breathing room into it. So that knowledge got me thinking about this card thing, and it sure enough, with a king size, it fits in there fairly well, and I can get my thumb in it, and it's got plenty of depth to it to hide the end of the packet from coming into view there. And you can see, I don't know if you can see on the video, the thumb tips are a little bit translucent. The card comes up to here, so it's quite a bit longer than a bill. And that's one of the reasons why you need the king size. So you need it for the radius, and you also need it for the length to work with a card. So this is the setup. We folded twice into quarters, and we did some pre-tearing in both directions, and this is what you should have when you're putting it into the thumb tip to start. This will be sitting in your pocket so that you can access it very easily and get your thumb into it. Also, in the same pocket, you want to have your Sharpie, and that is where you're going to get loaded up. So this is sitting out in plain view, but consider that these would be sitting in your pocket as we go through the presentation here. So the presentation would be fairly simple. You would just take any random card. Now this is actually a duplicate card, so I don't ruin this nice deck right here. I've got, again, a huge stack of cards to go through. And one thing about practicing this, if you really want to do this, you do have to practice it. I had to do this a bunch of times before I got comfortable dealing with the thickness of this card and the thumb tip. So a couple of ideas on that is just buy some cheap cards and do it with those. Buy casino used cards and practice with those. You could probably even use some index cards if you just cut them to the relative size, and those would give you enough to work with to kind of get the basics down. But in general, if you're really into card magic, you've probably acquired quite a few decks of cards, and as they start to get worn out and they're not usable, don't throw them away. Use them for torn and restored practice, and that's what I've done. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to have the cards selected. You would reach into your pocket, you get out the Sharpie, and then you would have them sign. Now, I'm having them sign the face. This is kind of the impromptu version. Now, if you weren't going to do this impromptu, you could force a duplicate, and then you would have a duplicate of that card loaded into the thumb tip. So I would force an 8 of spades, and I would have a duplicate 8 of spades already loaded into this. So I'd be a little limited in the choice of card. But otherwise, the presentation could still be good. If I do that, I could have them sign the back of the card, and then I could present the face as I'm tearing it up. And that was one suggestion made in the comment section on the video that I put up there. It's a really good suggestion, and that actually might give an improved kind of experience in all of this. That being said, we'll do it the way that I did originally, and you would have them sign the card. Okay, so you'd have them sign in such a way that it'd make it identifiable. Again, this might be an ambitious card that you were doing a routine with earlier on. You would take the Sharpie and then put it into your pocket, and as you do that, that is your opportunity to get the thumb tip on. You cannot handle a deck of cards with a thumb tip on very well, so you'd want to be able to have a reason to go for this in your pocket to get it out. Now, a couple things about thumb tip presentation. You can show a thumb tip from the forward view, but I'll be honest with you, a king-size thumb tip like this, a big one, you want to keep it hidden behind the fingers. So the only time you would see this is just, by chance through the windows of your fingers. You wouldn't look at this head on and directly. It's quite a bit larger than a regular, than your real thumb. And it's really foreign. So I would keep this out of view and use it the way you're supposed to use a thumb tip. And if you watch my performance, I don't really show it off very much. You probably get a few glimpses of there in the shadow of the hand, but otherwise the thumb tip stays out of view. So we've had the thumb tip loaded on. After putting the Sharpie away, you show your card to the spectators. Now everything from here forward is going to be from the behind view. So very quickly, this is my handling. I fold over to the right, and again, you want your folds to be relatively square, and you do want to practice this so you can be as quick as possible. One person made the comment that you want to go quickly because it looks fidgety. There's no way around that because we're going to be doing a switch twice in here, so there's going to be extra moves. So one idea on that is to really make it look like you're working in the creases, and that will give you some excuse for some of the fidgetiness later. The next fold, you're going to go down. And again, you want to square this up. And as soon as you get that fold, you're going to push the thumb tip forward and deposit the loaded card behind it. Now, I found that you probably should turn over this way with the margins on the bottom going outward to the audience for the simple reason that this is very awkward. Even if I pinch that, if that goes forward on the audience view as opposed to these, if you look in the bottom here, this is a much less alarming kind of picture looking at the edges of these. So once I've loaded that on, I'm going to rotate the packets with the border facing out, and then I get it upright. Now immediately I want to get this squared away because I've already folded down and I need to start unfolding. So what I do is I push off to the left, and then I take my free thumb over here, and with my fingers covering up the edges, I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to fold pretty harshly down on that corner. And what this does is it gives me the ability to jam this in fairly freely. Okay, so once I've folded down, I'm going to do my first switch completion. I'm going to push forward on the front bill, and then I'm just going to push this in like I would on a bill switch. Now, as I do this, I can mimic the idea of pushing on that crease, and that can cover up some of the fidgetiness. So I load in, and I push like I'm creasing the bill, and then immediately open up, and then move on. Okay, so I've already switched out to my duplicate. I'm going to fold down, and then I have to be careful here. I want to open this like a book. The reason being is that I don't want to flash the index or any part of the face to the audience. If I open like this, there's a chance that they can see inside on my card, which is may be nothing like the card that I'm using, that I started with. So I bring the borders towards myself and then open it like a book, and that makes it fairly angle-proof from kind of spectators that are directly in front of you. So you want to watch your side angles a little bit. Once I've got it open, I'm going to fold it back down again and probably mime this creasing action one more time just to make it look like I'm doing something, and then I'm going to get to tearing. Now I've already got it started for good reason. It makes it easy, especially since you have a big thumb tip on your thumb. It's hard to tear cards with that on there, so having the pre-tear is very useful. So I tear the first one, and I make a point of making this open so they can see that action happening. The next thing I did, and this might be a little bit different than what you saw on the video, I placed this packet inside of the other one, but what I'm going to do is do it the other way. I'm going to put the left packet inside the right one, and this keeps me from having to rotate my hand in such a way that that thumb tip is viewed. So I just need to take my card and turn it over on the left side, flip it over, and then allow this to open up a little bit. It will automatically want to spring open. And then I slip the other one inside of it. And now what I can do is I can bring this up and again open it like a book. And then I go into my second tear. So it's already been pre-teared up there, and these need to be lined up in order to do this properly. And then I tear again. So from the audience perspective, they're seeing the back sides only. They're not seeing the faces. Now from here, I can do a count, and this is just a proof. So I take 1, 2, 3, 4, and I look really clean because I don't have anything else in my hands. Everything's buried inside this thumb tip, and they can't see the thumb tip from the front view. So I've got 4 pieces. Now this is a bit of a cumbersome move, and this might be a little bit different than what I did in the video, but what I need to do is I need to get these face to face. So I'm going to close this like a book. I'm just going to keep these on the same side, close it like a book. Okay, so that they don't catch a glimpse of the inside of that. And then I turn it over. It does not matter where the border is at this point because there can be a discrepancy. I'm dealing with pieces at this point. I'm not dealing with a packet, a folded card. So I can leave it this way with the border on the bottom, even though my card coming in might be different. And then once I get to this point, I'm going to push over again, and I'm going to bring out my original packet. Okay. Now at this point, I need to do another turnover. So I'm going to press up on my fold and then turn it over immediately. Okay. So again, I'm folding the edges, the outward border edges towards the spectators because this is a bit of a jarring view to see that folded edge there. So fold it out or turn it out towards the audience. And then I'm going to do a very similar kind of stuffing motion. I'm going to push forward on my packet of 4. I have to push very briskly from the back side. Okay, quickly and firmly so that I get all the edges. And then I'm going to fold down again. But this time, for presentation's sake, I'm going to push up on the corner and hold it kind of cockeyed. And that gives the audience, the spectators, kind of this presentation where I have several pieces in my hand. So I show just like this. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to stuff. I'm going to reach over with my free hand and I'm going to stuff this packet into the thumb tip, but I'm going to retain it in my left hand. I'm going to hold it there for the rest of the presentation. And I found that doing this is a good idea just because it keeps me from having to be so fidgety while I'm working with the packet. If I can do this and keep it in my hand and finish out, it's easier to clean up once the card is opened up and in full view and all the heat is off. Okay, so I'm going to keep it inside of my left hand. It's all been stuffed in there. I'm going to release the back side of the packet, and then I'm going to bring my right hand out in front. Now, the whole while I've kept my hand kind of closed as if I'm holding on to pieces or as if I'm covering pieces. I'm going to reach out in front. I'm going to stick my left or my right thumb underneath, and then I'm going to lift up as if I'm placing a quarter of the card onto it. Then I'm going to rock back and forth, and then I'm going to release. And the audience perspective, it looks like I put a quarter piece onto one of the quarters that I have. I'm going to bring my hand back like this as if I'm holding pieces. It's ambiguous where the pieces are at right now, but I don't want to keep my hand nice and open like this, such that it looks like the card's already been completely restored. So I keep my windows closed on my fingers. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the card, and I'm going to buckle with my right thumb. I'm going to push forward with this corner over here, and that opens up the left side so that I can catch a break with my left thumb. Now at this point, I'm going to bring my right thumb inside, and then I'm going to raise it with my hand completely covering. I'm going to raise it up, coordinate that move so that I cover the whole top half as it comes up. And from the front, it looks like I'm assembling this quarter now. So I'm going to rock it, and then I'm going to pull my fingers back, but only to this crease right here. And I'm going to make it look like from the front, you can look back at that performance as if I've assembled this quarter. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to rotate the card in my hand, and very quickly I'm going to get to the point here. I'm going to reach up, grip, and then pull down as if I've assembled this quarter, even though it's already there. Okay, so we're mimicking kind of the motions that you would do in one of the more well-known torn and restored routines, where you're putting one quarter on at a time. We're just kind of miming and faking the addition of the last quarter. And it might go over that way, it might not, it doesn't really matter. People should be amazed by this point. Now, once I've done that, I can open up and show the card completely put together. Now they're looking at the back at this point. And then I can flip the card over to show them the front, and they'll see that signature on there. And now I'm ready to clean up. So I'm just going to reach over with my left thumb to pull back my thumb tip and get it behind my card. And then it's just a simple matter of getting my thumb inside of it and easing it on over. Now one thing I found that you should do is that since you have pieces here, they're going to want to stick out. They don't want to all go in there. So as I'm pushing it on, I want to be pressing fairly firmly against the front edge of that thumb tip to make sure that all the pieces get inside. And once I have that on there firmly, I can do my very, very open presentation of it. I want to keep my thumb tip hidden behind the card. Or behind the fingers. So I can kind of open my fingers and you'll see it through the windows of my fingers and it makes my hand look empty. I can turn the card like this. I can show the card like that. But I just want to keep this hidden behind it. And I'm pretty clean. At this point I could actually set the card down on the table and bring my hands back and be fairly open and gesture like this, but I don't ever really want to show them the thumb tip. Again, this is a little too big to get away with that move. You just want to keep it hidden behind there. And once I've done that, I'm free to ditch it. I mean, I'm free and clear at this point. I can just wait a moment, either ditch this under my armpit, which might be kind of risky with these pieces, or just get it to my pocket. I might take the deck that I have and put that in my pocket and put it away and get rid of it. I might take out the pen again. I just ditch it and then take out my marker, and then I can gesture and say, and that's a signed card. That's, whatever excuse you want to have to ditch. But really, you can take your time because everybody knows that uses a thumb tip for anything. When you have a thumb tip on, you're as good as clean. This looks empty to people. So that's my idea. I'll follow up here with a few more thoughts on this, and then I'll leave it to you to figure out how you want to use it. So a few final thoughts on this concept. Just a reminder, if you want to, you can force a card and have a duplicate in the thumb tip of the forced card and have them sign the back, and then you would just do the reverse perspective of everything. You would end up folding the card face out with the signature on the inside, and psychologically that truly might be a better presentation. It might be worth the force to do it that way. And if you have some spare cards, you can kind of operate on that concept of using duplicates to force a card inside of a deck that you don't want to ruin the deck. You just put your duplicate in there, and then you have a second duplicate inside of your thumb tip. So one idea right there. Second idea is that if you want to do it the way I'm presenting, like this, keep the card that you've done rather than giving it away. Just hang on to that, show it and keep it in your deck. And then what you do is you take this card, and this now becomes the loaded card for the next time that you do the trick. It's a very economical way to do it. So, you don't have to make a new gaff or anything. The gaff's already been made. All you have to do is take the card, fold it down, put your pre-tears into it, and then stuff it into your thumb tip, and you're ready to go for the next time you do it. So, fairly instant reset there using the previous card as the new load. So those are my ideas. Most of these ideas came from watching a number of other torn and restored routines and just thinking about how can I kind of present that same image of assembling quarters just using a regular playing card without actually having to use some sort of gaff or switch on pieces. And I came up with that sort of handling that I think can be done fairly quickly and in a compelling way. And the reason why I think this works so well is because we're so used now to seeing this kind of handling with pieces that from a performer's perspective, you just automatically want to assume that pieces are being put onto pieces. Okay? And it's really just no different than the old thumb tip torn and restored bill, where you fold up the pieces and then you unfold the bill and it's restored. It's just that we're using the unfolding motion like this to more mimic, to kind of have a better mimic of a more classic sort of presentation of a torn and restored card. So cover up as you unfold, and do it 1/4 at a time, and the perception ought to be that you are assembling quarters onto the card. So those are my thoughts on this. Good luck with that. If you find this to be useful, hey, use it and make it better and do whatever you want with it. If you find this to be a waste of time and you prefer other torn and restored methods, cool, that's fine. I just wanted to find a way to do this without having to make a bunch of gaffed cards, gimmicked cards, and just use regular playing cards and use something that I've always had but never found a use for. And it just made sense that we do other similar kinds of effects using a thumb tip. Why not use a big stinking thumb tip and do the same thing with a playing card? So that's what I got. Best of luck with that, and happy magicking.